All right, thanking and praising God once again, this time for an end to suffering. Let's call Nahum chapter 1, no mo, in my Southern country grammar for no more. Understanding that this chapter represents the end of Israel's suffering, even if it was for their sins. However, it is also going to mark the end of his mercy to the Assyrians, most notably Nineveh. Understanding that, it's an interesting contrast, as we mentioned, to the book of Jonah, which described the way in which God was extending his mercy to the people of Nineveh. It represents, once again, the same message to the world that he is giving to his people through most of these prophets, that his mercy is hard to describe, but it doesn't amount to a blank check. In this chapter that I'll say may divide into three sections, two of which are describing who God is, the third describing what that will mean for Nineveh and the relief for his people, Israel, I think in this case. Beginning in verse 1, identifying Nahum as, Nahum of Elkosh, and the word or oracle he is giving concerning literally Nineveh. Verses 2 through 6 are going to go on, as we mentioned, to describe who God is. I'll just read verses 2 and 3 that read, the Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries and keeps wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, great in power, and the Lord will by no means acquit the guilty. An important point to keep in mind as we realize that the second part of that section is going to go on to talk about the impact that his presence has on the earth and those who dwell on it. Verses 7 through 11, building on that concept that God is not simply powerful, but verse 7 is literally going to begin, the Lord is good, which is huge. If you've ever faced a powerful individual who isn't necessarily good, it just feels like you're getting bullied. What he is talking about as we go on through the rest of the chapter is helping us to understand, as we mentioned, how his power is used to intercede for those who have had enough, even if they are suffering for their own sins. Allah, Israel. As verse 9 is going to go on to talk about the what, or really let me not skip verse 8. Because after verse 7 says the Lord is good, it is going to introduce the contrast saying, but he will make a complete end of the adversaries, a phrase he will pick up again in verse 9, introducing the concept of no mo, thus our title. Picking that concept up in earnest in the last section that I'll describe the chapter breaking up into, starting in verse 12, going on through verse 15. He will talk about, or let's just quote, verse 12 saying, thus says the Lord, though they are at full strength and many, they will be cut down and pass away. Though I have afflicted you, I will afflict you no more. Once again, thus our title. Going on in verse 13 to say that the no more affliction for his people is also going to mark the no more of the prestige, as we mentioned, of the Ninevites. Verse 14 reading, the Lord has given commandment about you. No more shall your name be perpetuated. The end of verse 14, literally calling them vile. However, the bad news for the Ninevites marks the good news for the relief that he is bringing to his people. Verse 15, concluding the chapter by saying, behold, upon the mountains, the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace. Keep your feasts, O Judah, fulfill your vows, for never again shall the worthless pass through you. He is utterly cut off. Thus our theme, no more. However, the chapter might have most reminded me that utterly cutting off Nineveh at the end of verse 15 seems to have been what was necessary for God to bring peace to his people in the earlier parts of verse 15. The destruction of Nineveh seeming to be the unnecessary cost of bringing peace to God's people, which reminds me of not only the tragedy of the peace brought to them in Jonah, the peace that we said brought a turn, but a 360-degree turn back into the very same things God had cautioned them about. But beyond that 360-degree illustration we've used, It reminds me once again of why we sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. God, please give us the heart that does not require you to destroy us in order to create the peace that you have planned for your people.